There we go. Welcome. We're in the second session of Peter Block's. And for those that missed the first session, we will give you access to the recording. They're not being put on, they're not being added to our member material yet because you guys are paying it, you're paying for it. So, all right. And we'll figure out what we're going to do. Maybe they'll get it at some point. Somebody check your mic, see if that sound's coming from you. All right. So about me, I do consulting, and part of the consulting is always training because there's generally education when you're doing change. We get involved in OT projects that are pretty intense. I haven't reached out to anybody about some of the current things going on. Have worked for the chief of police in California and several of the law enforcement agencies. So we'll see. Reach out. Generally, people don't call. You have to call them. Single biggest problem in communication is assuming it's taken place. So one of the things we emphasize, because so much of ATD still training focused, and a lot of them are internal trainers. They don't see necessarily an obvious value. They don't identify themselves as external consultants, and therefore they miss the wisdom of Peter Block. And Peter Block's book is really written about becoming a partner in learning and development. And so just redefining what a client is and what a consultant is, or what you are doing. So an internal practitioner can be is just as important to view themselves as a consultant trying to solve a problem, because that sets up some psychological leverages that you can use that will help you stay extremely valuable to the organization, and where you're also guiding the process rather than just receiving it. We talked a little bit about that last time. So we talked about, just playing around. In our last session, we talked about phase one, entry and contracting. And just to kind of review, Peter Block's model is about getting your expertise used better, having your recommendations more frequently implemented, becoming more in partnership role, avoiding no-win consulting situations or training situation, developing internal commitment, which means funds, resources, commitment when things get tough, receive support from clients, employer, increase the leverage you have on clients, and establish more trusting relationship with clients. So all those apply to an internal practitioner. Two critical questions that a consultant should always ask is, am I being authentic with the person I'm talking to now, and am I completing the business of consulting phase I'm in? And being authentic means having hard conversations. I use the phrase healthy conflict. Some say dialogue would be better. I think if you accept the term healthy conflict, you'll understand that it could be a differing, you're coming at a perspective differently. And that's really important for people to talk about different issues and be able to listen at the same time. So that's the authentic part. And then you have to know what business you're in. And the biggest problem people do is they rush from one phase to the next phase without completing the first phase. There are three roles consultants choose when working with managers. The expert role, where you come in and take care of everything and don't really interact with a group. That doesn't really work for an internal practitioner, and it doesn't work it can work for a consultant for short term. For the long term though, you're not part of ongoing process because there's not a developing relationship. Pair of hands role, that's where you're implementing the manager's plans. The manager's running the show. And again, as an internal practitioner, one of the reasons you're hired is for your expertise in development and delivery and training and in feedback from what you're getting from your attendees. And so that's not necessarily a great role internally. And it can work for a consultant as well. Again, you're not building that partnership. So ultimately, we really want to get a collaborative role. Time and money for all three of these roles. We all play all three roles during part time. It's just we always want to maintain a focus on a collaborative role. Here are the here's the consulting model. Phase 1, entry contracting. Tonight's phase 2, discovery and dialogue. We're going to talk about that. Then phase 3 is feedback and decision to act, and then engagement, engage and implement, and then the last phase, extension, recycle, or termination. So we'll work through these. There's a description of them. They're clearly outlined in the book. We talked about a few things. I'm going to let, does anybody remember some of the items that came up, some of the takeaways you got from last week? Anybody that was on it for last week? Your mics are all, they might be closed if you self-close them, but they're all open on my part. Anybody want to share a tidbit they got from last week? All right. So discovery and dialogue. I don't know where what do we need from sports came from. I'll have to work on that. Discovery and dialogue is consulting and developing their own sense of the problem, helping the client discover who will be involved in defining the problem, what methods will be used, and what kind of data will be collected, and how long will it take. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. There are 3 tasks in phase 1. They're negotiating your wants, coping with mixed motivations, surfacing concerns about exposure and loss of control, and triangular rectangular contracting. That's kind of who's involved. In this session, we're going to talk about discovery and dialogue. We've already had our preliminary statements, our introductions. Questions prior to presentation discussion. So in terms, when you think about discovery and diagnosis, what comes to mind? So what I'd like you to do is just write down a few items that you think would be involved in phase 2 of Peter Block's model, just from the top of your head without looking at a resource or looking at what do you think? Make a mental note, because generally when we get in front of a client, we don't have a book in front of us. So what is top of the mind to you is generally top of the mind what you bring up with the client. And so part of the work we do is the more we work with this stuff, the more familiar, the more in depth we get, the more detailed we can get. So discovery and dialogue, what do you comes to mind that's involved in that process? Data and the baseline of the issues. Great. Okay. Thanks, John. If you've had your hands up, I've been missing you. Okay, nobody said. I don't see any hands up now. We've already gone over this. All right. So when we come to this section, based on what you've got written down, if you go to the field book, one of the things they're focusing on, and one of they're focusing on throughout the book itself, is consulting model. They talk about resistance, and he said you've got to expect resistance. And remember, you may or may not remember, we talked about John Cotter, and John Cotter said there are 4 ways to kill an idea: delay, confusion, fear-mongering, and character attack or ridicule. And if you look at these, this list of 14 from Peter Block, you kind of see they actually do fit in the 4 models. You've got confusion outright. Silence is kind of like, passive aggressive, behavior. An attack is obviously a character attack or an attack on the problem. So if you go through these are the things that you're going to see. And he says you're going to expect resistance. It's normal. Human beings hate change. Hang on real quick. I got a chat bar going. Data, that's okay. 3 steps for handling resistance. Identify in your own mind what form the resistance is taking. Pick up the cues from the manager or the person you're talking to, and then in your own head, put some words on what you see what's happening. State in neutral, non-punishing way the form of resistance is taking. This is called naming the resistance, and the skills used to find neutral language. Then be quiet and let the line manager respond. Technical training focuses the attention away from interpersonal and emotional reactions. So what Peter's doing is saying part of our role and what we bring to it is to get back to the human factors involved and pulling people away from the interpersonal relationships and focusing on what's going on with them personally and how they're responding to something. And down the bottom, there's a question, what's a common mistake of trainers? So when you're faced with this, does anybody have any stories that have come up, either how you've handled it well, how you've made a mistake with it, or you know, a comment you want to make on it, or maybe a question you want to ask on it?
Hey, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Britt here. I'm sorry, I don't have a story like you're asking for, but I did have a quick question from before.
Sure.
One of the signs of resistance was flight to health, and I wanted to see if you would explain that. Flight into health.
Yeah, I hope I typed it up right. Hang on, let me see if I copied it down right. What does it say? Page 140.
Jeffrey, this is Tammy. So when you're looking at it up, maybe multitasking here, when you say phases of resistance, is this resistance from the behalf of the consultant's resistance or on the behalf of the potential client?
Well, when he wrote this up, he was talking about it from the client.
Okay.
Except consultants are human beings too. They're going to have it as well. No,
Sure.
I did write it down right. Flight into health. Undoubtedly, the most subtle form of resistance occurs when somewhere in the middle or toward the end of the project, it appears that the client no longer has the problem that you're addressing in the first place. Oh, that's what he means. Yeah, I remember actually stopping on this one, Britt. So what they're saying is they call you in to fix a problem. And then when you get there to get rid of you, they say the problem's been solved.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that problem. It's not here.
Thank you.
So we have seen, I've seen all of these on a multitude of projects. One of the biggest projects that we had and was the most fun and also the most difficult was a project with a union. And they used to have 75% aggregate market share, and now they're down to less than 10. And they're just figuring out they've got an increase. So they want to increase membership and market share. And when we had the first meeting, we had done a huge survey, and we got them to talk about the survey, and they were all talking about their problems. And then they actually decided to sign the contract and everything else. And then out of the 22 unions or business units that signed the agreement, the first 5 we went to, they said they didn't have a problem, that everything was fine. And so they started off with a flight to health, and we said, okay, great, then show us what you're doing well. And then that's how we got around it. So does that answer the question, Britt?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I didn't mean to drag you back a couple of slides, but I did.
Oh, no, drag me.
I appreciate it.
These things are open. The presentation, these whole things are about discussion. The less I talk, actually, the better. I just talk to fill in the spaces and the gaps. Does anybody else have a story? Does anybody have a comment on the difficulty of forming your statement in a non-punishing way, naming the resistance?
Well, I would say that I think it comes up when you can see something that is happening and you know what's, you kind of have a good feel for what needs to be done. And just naming it, sometimes people don't want to hear it. They want to like avoid it, or they want to live in a place that denies it, etc. That's that denial piece. And so I think sometimes calling things as they are can create more resistance, so that it's like they're just not ready. And I think that gets to, you just have some of those what those different faces of resistance are, and just that timing is off, or they're just not ready to see it, right? So those are all part of what that might look like sometimes.
Absolutely. It's a good point. So, and I know you already know the answer to this. So does anybody know what's one of the techniques we use on that? That was Rhonda, right?
Yeah, that was me. Yep.
Okay. So what Rhonda just meant is people they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear something's not right, which is common. We hate knowing we're not as good. It's terrifying to think you're in a job and you're not doing it very well. It's terrifying. Britt can attest to that based on his opening story. The case is all for us. So what's one of the techniques we use to get around it when we talk to people? When you're talking to your friend, anyone.
So Jeffrey, it's Tammy. I don't know if you're talking about an actual technique that maybe you talked about before, but a lot of this really aligns with sales, which is my obviously area of expertise for the last 30 years here. And I've always been a firm believer that if you authentically approach the conversation, if you feel it in your gut, it's okay to say it. And if you state it, your number two here says a neutral tone. If you truly are not aggressive in a form that just says, I feel that you may be concerned, and I have a concern that perhaps we're talking about something that you don't want to move forward with. What I'm feeling correct? So if you feel it, you should say it. And to do that in a way that puts the person in an okay state that you're talking to is an okay thing to do. So you have to kind of like set that playing field. And people do make decisions emotionally. So you're trying to kind of take the emotion out and bring it back to an intelligent conversation, but call it what it is.
Thank you, Tammy. Anyone else?
I agree. I think what Tammy said was good. I don't know if this is in line with Peter Block or not, but one of the things that I think helps in any situation is to, I guess, to use a phrase, let the other person save face, and to kind of reassure them that we're there to help them be successful. And, if there's any way to position the situation so it doesn't look like they're going to be blamed or made to look bad in any way, unless, somehow they're admitting it, and being transparent with the team would be phenomenally helpful. And then again, helping them to see that would help them to be successful, to, as a leader, kind of admit it and say, we're going to work together to find an answer. But whatever the situation is, to kind of take that coach approach where you're really curious in terms of what is driving their behavior, what might they be apprehensive about, and trying to help answer that maybe unhidden thing that they don't even want to admit.
Yep. Excellent, Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
Looking real quick in the the field guide. There was a quote here. Let's see if I can find it soon enough. No, don't have it this time. We'll come back to it. Anybody else?
I had a project in Long Beach.
I like what this. I'm sorry.
Who is after John? Who's just talking?
Rhonda.
Hi,
But
Rhonda.
if John was going, let him go.
Okay, go, John. You're on.
Well, I had a project where the CEO called in someone, and I was the consultant. They had had a HR director for 13 years, and the HR director was very insubordinate. The CEO had very little control over her. And so my first question in my mind was, how could this happen for 13 years? So because the CEO did not want to confront or hold this person accountable. So in the first meeting, I had to kind of support her that this must be a very difficult HR director. I wanted to make sure that she realized, even though she did not have the managerial skills at this point, I did kind of establish a rapport that since I'm in the HR field, I could see, that there is some difficulty in understanding some of the orientation of an HR director, but it helped. She kind of relaxed then because I was understanding that this is not as much resistance, but she actually was saying, here's the problem, 13 years, please fix it and come back in a week or a month and tell me how you fixed it.
So she was asking you to be what?
Well, she wanted me to.
Going back here. Let's go back. Let's go back here. There. So expert role, pair of hands role, or collaborative role? What was she asking you to be?
Yes, the expert role of not being collaborative. I eventually had to become insisting that she meets with the HR director and myself when we started to develop a plan. Otherwise, it would be me, the consultant, trying to impose a plan on the 13-year veteran of the HR department. So it did take me pushing her. She was resistant because I could see why. This person, the HR director, was a handful. She was very aggressive and very stubborn, and I could see why she didn't want to confront her week after week. But that was her role. She was the CEO. She had to learn, I think, how to help, hold the HR director accountable. So, but she was very resistant to changing her role.
Yeah, because and why? Why? Just in general, why do people? What's one of the things that goes through their mind when you think about change or when a client thinks about change?
In the CEO's case, it would mean holding her ground with this very aggressive person, saying, no, I want you to do this, and I want you to do this by next week, and I know you have a lot to do, but she had to kind of rehearse what she was going to say to stand her ground, basically.
Yeah, excellent observation. Rhonda.
I was just going to say, I think touching back to what I think it was Cynthia who said, kind of going back to, I think sometimes if they're digging in and there's that resistance, for me, what I have found to be helpful, and I think, Tammy, you also said it, coming from that sales side, if you can do just the one thing and say, I heard one thing here, and just something that kind of caught your attention, and say, I'm really curious, what can you tell me more about, right? So just getting them to elaborate more so that they can talk, and maybe that gives you an opportunity to ask a question that highlights where that problem might be, right? Or where that gap might be that we're trying to fix. So I think getting them to talk in a way that feels non-threatening, helps them to feel safe, talks to what they've already said, so that acknowledgement, like Tammy was saying. But I think for me, what I found, if I can just say, there's one thing that I guess I heard this, and tell me a little bit more about that. What can you say? So and let it go from there, because then they'll usually fill in and give me where we need to go, and it a lot of times opens up that in their own minds. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's the issue. Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. But when they talk it through out loud, it kind of gets them there.
Very, very good. Excellent. Excellent comments. Anybody want to add to that? It's a good catch.
Jeffrey, I think to your question, why is there resistance? The one thing that comes to my mind is, first, there could be a myriad of reasons for that. However, one comment that I've heard a while ago kind of might sum it up nicely. I think the bottom line might be, and I throw this out to the group because I'm just talking off the top of my head, people resist because they don't see that changing would be in their best interest. They don't see that it would be valuable overall for them to change for whatever reason that might be. And John Maxwell, for those that might have heard of him, he's kind of known as the guru on leadership. He said, as he was young and growing and, advancing in his career, he always used to think that leaders love change, right? They thrive on change, and they are the real leaders, the people that like change. And the people that don't like change are the followers. And then he said, and then one day it finally dawned on him, leaders don't like change any more than followers do. Leaders only like change when it's their idea. And I guess, that implies that it's in their benefit to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question or what the team thinks about that. And just one other point, I think that's why true leadership is really so selfless and so sacrificial in that servant leadership, because a leader is willing to change even if it's not in their best interest or what they would prefer, and it's not as convenient for them, yet because it's for the best of the team or their team member or the organization, they're willing to let that go. And I don't think that's easy by any means.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great point. No, and it's good. And there's not one reason, that somebody doesn't do. Everybody has their own reasons for doing it. Let's see, where is it? One of the chapters Peter covers, go back and forth between the book. He talks about different types of questions and asking types of questions. I don't know. I can't remember if I put a slide together on this. I think I did because I really liked it. And it just talked about there are questions that, kind of sound salesy, like you're trying to sell them on something. And people like those questions because they show direction. Questions that make them think, questions that make them look internal, though, they're hard questions to ask because we don't commonly ask them. And those are the questions Peter is saying we need to ask. We need to understand how people feel and how they think and how it's affecting them. And people are different. And that's what the consultant is doing, is making real-time decisions on a very quickly moving track. Any other comments?
Yeah. I think you're right on, Jeffrey. This is Rhonda. I mean, it always is. It's the heart of it all. Always are the questions that we ask. And I'm a proponent that I don't care what role you're in. You're a leader. You're an individual contributor. Whatever level you are. One of the most critical skills people need to develop is the ability to ask good questions. And we need to ask a lot of different kinds of questions in different ways, and multiple times, just to get where we need to go. So I'm 100% behind you. Questions are key, and how we choose to build that pattern to get to where we need to go. It's laying that foundation to the path to open it up. Questions get you there. I'm 100% behind you. I think it's key.
Yeah, and it's in his field guide. It starts on page 117. It's a chapter, The Power of Questions. He said there are discovery questions, which people ask, finding out the clients expect us to ask, and then consumer questions. They're the ones that a vendor or supplier would ask. And, when you're asking those, the people are their customers. People love to answer the questions because they carry implied promise that their wants will be satisfied. And then there are control questions. These are questions designed to persuade. And he says, those are great. Those are all great. They're good. He says, well, we need to ask, and he calls them deepening questions. He says, deepening questions are questions whose purpose is to engage the other person. They are the
Right.
same questions you might hear from a therapist, a coach, or a philosopher. I mean, where do you read this stuff? It's so outside the scope, and it is such a breath of fresh air for me when I got pointed to books by Jim, who I work with, and it's just amazing. There's a line in here on page 97 in the field guide. It's by Andrea Markowitz, and she says, "It is impossible in human affairs to get it right the first time, but we always have the possibility of recovery."
Love that.
I mean,
That's great.
great stuff. Good job. Other comments?
Yeah, a couple of resources for questions. John Maxwell was brought up. His book, Good Leaders Ask Great Questions, he has a whole host of questions and different kinds of ways that we need to look at the business and asking questions. So it's a great book for questions. Another resource, an ATD brought them in one year for a workshop, was Vervago, and they have a program called Precision Questioning, because we ask questions at a very superficial level. And so you've got different kinds of questions that you do need to go deep. So talking about that deepening question, how do you go down versus wide? But you need to go wide as well, but just getting more precise can get you that. And they give you a whole bunch of examples as well. So I'm sure we can Google and pull stuff up. But I love it. So that's great. That's good.
Hey,
Great
real quick, can you type the name of that last book that you mentioned in the chat?
Yeah, chat's a
Sure,
great place.
I'll put it in the chat.
That'd be great.
Perfect.
Thank
I'll
you.
put both of them in.
Thank
You
you.
bet.
Jeremy and Jeffrey.
Yes.
Another one is called Power Questions. It's Build Relationships, Win New Business, and Influence Others by Andrew Sobel, S-O-B-E-L. And Tammy, I think you said that you were in sales. So I think it's really a great book as well. I mean, there's so many on asking questions. So I think that might be helpful for people. And Jeffrey, I'm not sure. I might have sent you an abstract on this one. If you can't find it, let me know, and I can see if I can find it to share with everyone else. And if anyone else has books, Jeffrey, if you want to send me the list, I'm happy to see if there's abstracts available too.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. You know what? If you would just capture them in the chat, that'd be perfect.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not sure that I have access to that, but I'll see if I can get that.
No, just put in the reference to it, and then we can come back to it. You and I can take care of it. And for everybody's knowledge, Cynthia's the one that's been providing the abstracts. She's got a link to it, and so that's been great.
Well, Jeffrey does his own, which are great too. Hey, and can I just say one other thing while I'm thinking about it? Based on your last comment, you may have heard this. I just love it. It says, if at first you do succeed, try to hide your astonishment.
So this isn't. This is what? Anybody else? John, is that you?
One other thought I have. When I was talking to the CEO, this first meeting about the HR director, and she said this person is horrible to work with, and she gives me a headache, I kind of accepted that as a given, and I couldn't think of asking what specifically does she do. I wanted to assure her that I accepted whatever she said, that this person was horrible to work with, and I didn't come back with, could you give me specifics? What does she do? What does she say? You know, I was paralyzed almost thinking, boy, this CEO hates working with this person. And I was kind of stuck. And I'm thinking that to be able to articulate the questions, give me the specifics. Did you tell me what happens? You know, that's where the real time issue comes up. You have to think on the spot. That's hard.
Yep. No, it's very, very hard. It's difficult, and that's why every engagement is an opportunity. Every conversation is an opportunity to try out skills. I'm a big promoter of practicing.
Right. Okay.
So I'll tell you a horror story. So had been I won't mention any names. It was local. I was doing some pro bono work, kind of help out and kind of get my name out locally. And so I'd been at this event and talked to the CEO and said, hey, I'd like to sit down and talk with you about a couple ideas. And he goes, oh yeah, absolutely. Send me an email. We'll set a date on the calendar. Great. So waited a couple days, and then sent an email and said, hey, yeah, let's get something in line. And the CEO kept moving it over to somebody else, and they would follow up, and we'd talk, and then I'd say, they'd end up saying, well, that'd be something the CEO has to handle. And so I said, yeah, that's why I was talking to him. I don't know why they put me on to you. And so I'd go back to the CEO. And finally, after about 4 attempts of this, I sent the CEO a letter. Do you have any? I said, look, I asked you if you would meet, and you said yes, and you said to send you an email, and you'd set a date. And I've sent you 4 emails, and you passed me on to somebody else, and we haven't set a date. So sends back and sets a date. So I went into the meeting, and the first 45 minutes, he was telling me how absolutely outraged he was at my email. And so a lot of resistance. While I was going through it, I was trying to figure out, what was driving this. Because it was just a way not to talk about the real issue that was going on. And I couldn't get past it, 45 minutes. So I tried a couple of things, and I just seemed to be digging myself deeper and deeper in it. And what was really hard is it wasn't bothering me at all, and that seemed to bother them more. And they were getting pretty upset, and they were actually making it uncomfortable for the person they brought in the meeting with them. And it was everything I could do by that point to just stop from just grinning and thinking, wow, this is just going so badly, it's comical. It was like you couldn't write this stuff. So during that time, though, I was thinking about how do I say things in a non-punishing way without saying the CEO was the problem in it, and just failed miserably.
Jeffrey, what did you learn from there? What would you say you would have done differently going back on it?
So what would I have done differently? Well, first of all, I hadn't expected that response as well for the person. And then in hindsight, I should have expected it. So I didn't do enough planning. So for me, I probably did the basic error and skipped into, am I being authentic? Yeah, I was. Am I completing the business consulting phase I'm in? I probably didn't complete the first one and was jumping into the second one. So I would say that was it.
Thank you.
99% of our problems with everything start at the beginning, not the end. And yet we look at the end and try and fix the end when generally we should have been looking at the beginning. So
Jeffrey?
for me, it's always the setup. Good question.
Can you clarify what you mean specifically about what you didn't do in the first phase and how you jumped into the second phase? And then as another question, why, if he was so adamant and didn't want to meet with you, why did he take the time to spend that much time with you and finally agree to meet if he really didn't want to?
So I don't know why the meeting went on that way. I mean, I almost entrapped him in it. I was basically, the email was written in a way, it said, look, you said you were going to do this. Do you normally make promises you don't intend to keep? So, it was pretty, if you dice it up, that's pretty way they came. So it was a chance for them to release some tension, I guess. And they got into it, and then the amygdala kicked in, and it just went on and on. It was funny. Part of the reason the meeting was scheduled for an hour, it went on 45 minutes. Part of it was because I kept coming back with questions. They make a statement and always trying to goat me into fighting back emotionally, and I come back with a question about what was going on. So to answer your question, so in entering contracting, the first meeting is to discuss the problem is, whether the consultant is the right person to work on, what clients' expectations are. So what I didn't do is, in terms of, I knew it would have been a tough decision. I misread the CEO. I thought they had different qualities than they did. And because of that, I kind of jumped into a little of developing my own sense of the problem. So I was bleeding into discovery and dialogue without firmly taking care of the elements in entering contracting.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I know, I don't know for sure, but it seems like sometimes you might be too hard on yourself. And so thank you for clarifying.
Yes. You're so kind.
Jeffrey, this is Rhonda. Question for you. So one of the things you talked about, that planning phase and being, kind of anticipating and going through a phase to prepare yourself. Would you recommend having some type of like an interview guide, a question guide, a kind of a planning guide of how, to anticipate all the different directions things could go, but being prepared with the kinds of questions that you could ask and how you could follow up, et cetera, just so that you had your go-to to go into a meeting?
Absolutely. And the reason I like Peter Block's book is you can build them from there. You can build question sheets from them, and I have them. I just did what a lot of us do. We got busy. Half my brain was saying, oh yeah, let's go ahead with this. The other half was the intuition was going, this isn't going to work out. And so I just didn't put the time in. It just comes down to who's going to work harder for it. And checklist, if you don't use it, if you skim a checklist or go through it unconsciously, doesn't do you any good.
Yeah.
So, great question. And that's a great tool. Do you have a checklist that you use?
I do. I have a number, like, especially for the learning side, when I'm going in and trying to figure out what's going on, the business analysis piece. So I have a few different checklists that I use for understanding the business needs, the learning needs, the organizational needs. So I do have a series of questions that I kind of keep to. I follow a lot of times also, another piece that I'll pull in is Thomas Gilbert's work, those 6 boxes. So looking at both from the environmental and the individual, what's going on to figure out where the gaps are. So I'll follow, that process as well.
Yeah, add that reference to the chat. That'd be great.
Okay.
All night long.
Jeffrey and Tammy, I think was that Rhonda that was speaking? Rhonda?
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was.
I coach my sales teams to think about the questions that they ask, and we spend, I would say, 70% of the training I provide for sales focuses around the introduction into the sales call and the qualifying portion of the sales call. So when I look at that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 you had on the other slide there, Jeffrey, it's kind of like a sales process. And I do that for a reason, because if we can truly understand whether it's a fit or not from the very beginning and work out some of those things up front, it solves a lot of problems that tend to come up later when you're trying to close an opportunity, for example. But the questions part really matters. And I spend a lot of time talking and helping the sales reps practice with exercises on the difference between a fact-finding question and an emotional question, the feeling. And I like what you have here on the slide, Jeffrey, where it says, I feel, I've observed, and it seems. And a lot of things, when we think about questions, it's really to help the customer who sometimes doesn't have that chance, and the client, to take a step back and to think. So asking questions and to think through questions is really beneficial for them, because it may be the first time they've ever had a chance to slow down, stop, and think, and kind of really understand what's going on and where they're at. So the questions matter a lot. So I really like where you guys are going with the questions. Super, super important. Makes a huge difference.
Thanks, Tammy. Good input. It's great input. One of the things I was surprised at, the questions on the right, you don't see yourself as part of the problem, you're giving me detail. They're straight out of Peter Block's book. And to me, when I first read them, it's like these could come off. You have to be careful how you deliver these because you don't see yourself as part of the problem, huh? Versus you don't see yourself as part of the problem. If you've got a little energy going in your voice, you could really deliver these in the wrong way. So it's what I like about Peter's work is he doesn't, he's got this language about caring about people without being, he's almost like a doctor. Like if you see a doctor go into a heart, I mean, they're not delicate. If you see a doctor go into a wound or reset a bone, they're not delicate. They exert effort on this. And these questions exert effort to me. They're not delicate. They're not faint of heart. Comments?
Mm-hmm. This is Kathleen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Kathleen.
I was thinking as everybody's sharing their experiences about there have been a number of times when I've been through something for a contract or in this case that I'm thinking of was a contract, and I would have loved to have come to a group of more experienced practitioners like this and said, what do you think I should have done differently? I was pitching for a consulting contract with a nonprofit organization, and they were having to come up with some metrics for a program that they were doing that was being funded by a larger organization. And so basically this was their client, and if they wanted to keep getting funding, they had to show that they were making an impact, a positive impact. So I did my homework and I went to this meeting with the CEO and the COO of this organization, and we did our introductions, and I asked them a few questions, and then I got to what are your goals for this? Like what will tell you that that you're succeeding? And I got this deer in the headlight expression on both. It was like that just kind of stopped. It was weird how it just stopped the dialogue. I mean, I am used to going to interviews, whether I got it or not, the work or not, of just being able to really talk. And we were like 20 minutes into our discussion, and it was like the energy just left. It was like I felt like they were done. And they really had no idea. And I don't know if it was because they felt suddenly on the defensive that I asked them and they couldn't answer. So I said, well, I proposed to them, for this amount of money, why don't I sit down for actually, no, I wasn't going to charge them for helping them articulate what their goals were. And then once they got that, then I would charge this month to do a needs assessment. So I didn't hear anything back from them. So I called my contact and I said, do you know what they ended up deciding? And he said, oh, one of our IT people understood that they were looking for a consultant. And so he came up with the proposal for an IT solution for this. And so they gave the work to him, and I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Maybe he was able to show them the goals and all this, but there seemed to be like this big chunk of something missing. And I thought, okay, should I have handled that differently? Should I have kept prodding? Should I have, or what, was it just kind of hopeless? It always just was weird to me that I asked them for the goals, they didn't know, and we're done here. I've never quite run into that.
Any comments from anybody?
So he invited you in, Kathleen, to have the conversation?
Yes.
I mean, I'm just a firm believer of stating right up front, the conversation we have today is going to result in a decision that says we should keep talking or we shouldn't. By the time I share and you share and we kind of have some discussions, we'll probably make some decisions here on gathering whether or not we should keep talking. It sounded like when you invited me in, because he invited you in, when you invited me in,
Mm-hmm.
it sounded like there was something you wanted to hear or see or maybe feel from me that would help you in what your ventures are. It kind of sounds to me like maybe that didn't happen. So I guess I'm confused, So it just seems really odd that he would just like freeze up like that.
Yeah. Well, I said perhaps I can help you with articulating what your goals are, and why don't I get back to you with a proposal? Because I felt like we were done at that point. That's as much as they wanted to talk.
Right. You're a lot nicer than I would be. I would just say, I probably would have just said, I feel that I've missed the mark completely. I'm not hearing something. I'm not getting it. So I've missed it completely. And it could happen. I mean, it could be that it's just not a fit. At the very least, maybe I have some sort of a referral or something else to help you on your path. I mean, that happens. Sometimes it's just not a fit. I don't want to waste your time. I certainly don't want to waste my time either, in the spirit of, us being professionals here. Should we keep talking? Should I even give you a proposal? If I did, it would probably just sit on your desk. That's kind of how I'm feeling. Is that what you're thinking? But yeah, crazy.
Anyone
Okay,
else?
well, thank you.
It's good. It's great comments. Anyone else? Okay. So when we talk about going from discovery to diagnosis discovery, sorry, we can be a guide through a process of discovery, engagement, and dialogue in which our clients will find an answer to their question and launch an implementation that will be enduring and productive. We have to be aware of navigating through management styles, organizational politics, while building the client's internal commitment to the process and receptivity to recommendations requiring giving attention to resistance and human emotions. So on this one, it wasn't a disaster, but it didn't work out the way I had planned. Group caught me in. I had done some work for them. Then the COO brought me in to work with the director of operations the director of a division of operations brought me in to work with the COO, chief operating officer. And chief operating officer, I'd been told, guided, that they would change their mind. They were very politically astute. They had their eye on the CEO seat, that they were having some difficulty with the board, and they were having trouble with a division. And the guy said, okay, be my expert, go out, solve the problem, come back, give me the answer. So what I should have done is said thank you and paused and asked some hard questions about the organizational politics, about their objectives, about what they would accept, what they couldn't accept. I should have spent, and the problem was the client, the chief operating officer would hold meetings 4 days out of the week, and there would be a line out his door of people waiting to, I mean, the hours wasted. It was just the way he did things. And all he did is do meetings, and then he'd stay after and work till 9 o'clock at night doing all the paperwork and everything else. So you really were, he made everybody culturally aware that his time was very, very important. And I let that get the best of me. And I went out, figured out what the problem was, came back with a solution. He says, I can't do that. I won't present that to the board. Thanks for your time. It was a good solution. It would have worked out great. Thanks for your time. Here's your check. Thank you very much. So it wasn't terrible. It was disappointing to have done the work, and they, it was great getting paid. Anyway, so really one of the things we have to do as consultants, and internal practitioners have to be aware of this constantly. Did organizational politics change with COVID-19? Yeah, immediately. And when something dramatic like that happens, you have to stop and you have to re-go over everything. Where are we on things? It's almost like, to use an analogy, even though I've never flown, maybe Britt has flown, I've never flown a jet. They have checklists and they have critical, and when things start to go wrong, you have to go through your checklist of things to make sure that you stay alive. And we really should take the same attitude as consultants. Comments?
Yeah.
Stories.
I know, I'm having trouble with my phone.
Jeffrey,
Well,
are you able to share what your solution? Oh, go ahead.
What? Oh, John, I had you muted. We were getting feedback from your mic.
You still?
Yeah. When I muted you, I'm sorry, I muted you from this end. When I muted you, the feedback stopped. Did you have a question, John? And then we'll go back to Cynthia.
Yeah. Yes, just so the context is clear on this idea that we're in this new era, are you saying that we should be obviously aware of the implications in the climate, in the organization, because of COVID-19 and how people are reacting to that? Is that it's very significant. Most organizations, I agree.
Well, and COVID-19 is just a recent global shared event that we're all experiencing. It could be anything. You change one of the executive teams, and there's a political shift. You get a new. One of the things that a lot of internal consultants don't pay attention to is what's going on with the CFO. The CFO is attached to the hip to the board and the CEO. And what the CFO generates a huge amount of change based on what's going on. And they're worried about cash flow, and they're worried about leverage, and they're worried about profitability. And when a CEO makes a promise on a stock report, whether they're publicly traded or not, they're privately held, then it's to the investors. That promise, they expect it to be met. They expect predictability, and they'll do all kinds of things to hit that number. And so being aware of what's going on internally in an organization is extraordinarily critical. The COVID thing is just, it was a major change. The minute I was in Washington, D.C. when this came down, and I was supposed to leave Washington, go home for 2 days, and then head to the client. And the minute it hit, I thought, oh God, this is going to be it. The clients are going to start calling, and I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, every single day a new client was calling. By the way, oh yeah, we were thinking. based on the way things have changed. It was so obvious it was coming, though. You couldn't miss that one. But there are things that are less obvious that you have to pay attention to, whether they're stressed at home, they're going through a divorce. I mean, people do different things.
You know, it's
So
interesting that you say that, Jeffrey. This is Tammy. I was listening to, just very briefly this morning before I jumped on some calls, there was live a live LinkedIn thing that happened, and I accidentally hit my phone and it popped on. So I was like, okay. But the Gardner Group CEO, their CEO came on with a live meeting talking. Gardner Group is all about information technology and information and data and statistics. And one of the things that they talked about is how the conversation is evolving beyond just ROI and really focusing on humans and the human counterpart, which they never really talk about these things. Like, they're very data driven. That's what Gartner Group is all about. And it was interesting to hear the comments of the CEO in the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, and what companies are doing in terms of a pivot or a focus and a reshift into what they're thinking. I thought it was kind of interesting. I had to go, so I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, but I want to go back and kind of listen back to what they say, because Gartner has the attention of people in big data and data management and information processing. And it was just kind of interesting to hear their take and insights on what's going on, and to say that it's focused on the impact on humans and human beings and what's going on, and that companies are tuning their ear into that to better understand how to manage that process. Totally different.
yeah, it's great. Thank you, Tammy. That's great. Could you do me a favor? Just write Gardner Group so that people can look it up and look at it as a resource. So it's funny you mentioned big data. So I've been following Cambridge Analytica for years on what they were doing, and when they helped, they're big political big data player, or they were, and they had done work in South Africa, and then they did work in the United States, and then they did work in England over Brexit. And Alexander Nix, he's running data. He's just delivering what people want, except when it became associated that they were changing people's vote, and that people didn't feel like, oh my God, I've been influenced. Really? You never bought a purse because you saw it advertised. You're all of a sudden shocked because you were influenced by an ad. They went after the company. And so here was a company that was all about data, and what really hurt the company and Alexander Nix is the human aspect on how people took it and what they did. Cynthia, you had a question or something you were going to say about 10 minutes ago. Sorry. Are you with us, Cynthia, or we lose you? You're on mute, Cynthia.
Okay. Yeah, I had to find. Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay. Before I comment, I don't know. Did Britt, were you trying to say something earlier?
No, go ahead, Cynthia. It wasn't a big deal. Go ahead.
Did you
Thank
raise
you.
your hand,
I
Brett?
appreciate it, though.
Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. Go.
We started talking at the same time. No, go ahead, Cynthia. I appreciate that.
Cynthia,
Though.
then Brett.
Okay. So Jeffrey, I don't know if we have time or not, but would it be possible for you to share what your solution was? And then also with John, if we have time, was just kind of wondering what was resolved with that, situation where the conversation needed to be had, and how did that end?
Sorry, I muted myself. Cynthia, real quick. So the solution was specific to that division. It's not a solution would have fit anywhere else. And in that case, it was a very odd solution. They had created supervisors. This division had grown up and they had supervisors, and supervisors really didn't do anything other than schedule people to where they were supposed to be going. And they become very cliquey, and they were rewarding their friends. They'd had no management training whatsoever. And they'd really kind of become, they were doing all the things that you would do in a dysfunctional relationship. They were isolating the division from the other divisions. They were not being, they were withholding information on what was going on, and they were being very subjective to the people. So the recommendation was to if you want to solve the problem immediately, just reduce the supervisors back. You don't have rotating supervisors, which was, I knew they probably wouldn't do that. Put them in management classes, or get rid of them. Those are the three options that they had. And he didn't want any of them. Didn't want to take any of them. And the two, he focused on the ones where like, well, I'm not gonna get rid of them. I'm not gonna reduce them. Well, then you have the option. Let's get them some training and get them doing some training on that. And then I made recommendations for trainers, and my job was done. He didn't even imply that he was going to get training on it. And I followed up with some internal people, and they never did get the training. So, and to this day, I don't know. He was worried about getting the CEO position, and there was something with the board and something with some of the people in the department with the board, and I have no idea what it was and never found out. That's just the way it went. So, did that answer your question, Cynthia?
Thank you.
Okay. Was there another question?
Yes,
or?
thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, if there's time at the end, or if it's appropriate at some point, and even if it's offline, John, I'm just interested in learning, what was the resolution to the situation that you were faced with? Did it have a happy ending, and how did that get resolved?
And that question's directed to Cynthia? Sorry.
That
John.
was John.
So I will tell you that happened. I advised them that since there had been no documentation for 13 years on the problem director of HR, I said it would be dangerous and probably expensive to fire her. So I developed a plan, a 6-month plan, that gave the expectations exactly as the CEO would like them to be achieved, and put that into place and help them measure if the HR director could do these things. So it would be ideal for the CEO. She couldn't do all those things, so eventually I helped them develop a severance package, and she got a settlement and left, and I helped them hire a new HR director.
Okay, thank you very much.
Brett, you're on.
No, the conversation has turned several times since that question, and I'm not a consultant like you guys are. I have a boss that I work with very closely, but I think the question back there was, do you communicate, hey, how are we doing throughout the process? And I just was going to chime in at the time that, I asked my boss a lot, hey, are we on the right track? Am I focused on the right things? And so I communicate with him a lot just to stay focused on the goals and make sure that the goals haven't changed. And, I ask them about people and their perceptions of what's going on. And I really try and keep my finger on the pulse of the people in the company and how they feel about the work that we're doing. And that's what I was going to say. It was in response actually to something, a question that you had. Thanks.
Great. It sounds like you're doing a great job of keeping communication high, which is what he's talking about. Peter Block's talking about in these 4 elements that are listed here. And these are on page 177 in the book. Any comments on Britt or Britt?
Thanks for sharing, Britt. I think it's a great observation. And just Jeffrey and group, what do you think, and according to Peter Block or just your own thought, how do you recommend asking the client for, how's it going, and kind of getting some feedback, anything that the consultant could be doing differently? So one, what do you think about doing it? And then two, what would be the best practice or approach in ways of asking, and how frequently?
It's a great question. Who wants to take a shot at it? We have 5 minutes. It would take about 3 minutes. A couple of different options for Cynthia.
That's a great question, Cynthia. In my case, I happen to have a weekly meeting with my boss who resides in Cape Cod, and I am here in California. So we have a scheduled meeting every week, and I just put that on our list of topics to discuss. So there's a cadence in place.
Anyone else? That's great. Anyone else? Tammy?
Yep. So Jeffrey, my question would be, again, going back to kind of that slide that had the process itself. I am just humbled to be on the call with all of you guys, because you are true consultants and you have true success in the consulting environment. And it's just amazing to me, and I want to get there. I stepped out and tried it for 2 years and then stepped back into corporate America. The finances didn't make sense, and I had to get back to actually paying the bills. I give you beyond credit and just kudos beyond. I think my biggest challenge in this world of thinking of it from a consultant perspective is my own head trash gets in the way. So I go back to some of those comments I saw in the slides back, and I turn into the expert mode and I do all of these things. And as soon as I think I'm a consultant versus my traditional professional world of sales, I fall apart and all kinds of things happen. So I wonder, from an advice perspective, when you got going in your careers as consultants, what did you feel was the most important thing that helped you get there? Was it because you were an expert? John mentioned early on, he certainly had a third-party story, if you will, to bring to the table, because he had expertise in the HR world. So that put that particular client at ease, or potential client, and allowed the conversation to open and continue. So any words of wisdom of getting the consultant possibility going would be huge.
Anybody want to jump on this real quick? Got about 3 minutes. Rhonda?
This is Rhonda. Tammy, what I would say, like early on in starting out, I really leveraged relationships with people, so people that could be mentors and support to me, and I could work in tandem with. So I think I got experience, working with some people that really had that kind of knowledge, expertise, etc. So I wasn't the lone wolf going out and figuring it out on my own. So I would say, if there's any way to leverage others, that would be what I would recommend. And this is one way, these kinds of things. For me, my path had been coming through ISPI versus ATD. So that was where I went first. Then I came to ATD. So they had more of a consulting model, and the LA group is still functioning. So maybe getting that group, and they meet about once every quarter. And they'll bring in different people for things. So I'd say, for me, that's in getting started. I would say leverage off of, who are some of the people in the world that you can tag team with, work with, be an apprentice to, just while you're starting to build it, et cetera. So to me, that was what helped me.
Thank you. Very good.
Yeah, and Tammy, what I like about Peter's model is so he gives you the model to approach it as a consultant. You don't have to tell anybody you're a consultant. You just practice practice this stuff internally, and trying to identify where they are. His approach is not, it wasn't something that was artificial. It's something, he built the approach from the way people think and in terms of a business environment. And so I find that the process he outlined pretty much flows the way people think. It just gives it some hard edges so you know where you're standing. So you have a much firmer footing, and you've got to learn by mistakes. You're absolutely going to learn by mistakes.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's the only, I think that's the only, unfortunately, it's the only way to learn. They talk about, I know why we're right at 8:30 now, just kind of finish it up. They talk about how 80% of consulting projects don't meet their objective. It doesn't mean they failed. The union project, they invested $6-7 million with us. They ended up getting, we brought them like $40 to $60 million worth of business just in the years we were there. So, so did they hit the objective though of changing their culture? No, they didn't. They killed it right when we had a chance to make a keystone, plant the flag in a key area. If they let us plant that flag, it would have changed everything. And the groups went against it, so they destroyed it. So any final comments from anybody? These are open discussions. The idea is that the model gives you the structure and the framework, and the idea is to bring your questions to it. What I'm thinking, if you're going to make the third one, is maybe bring something you want to look at as a consulting project and kind of outline it using Peter Block's model, and then we can talk about it.
Cool.
Super.
Cool.
Any comments, final? You guys have been great discussion. Suggestions if you want, different ways for me to guide this and handle the activities and the attendees and everything. Ways to improve, always looking to improve.
Thanks for doing this, Jeffrey. Appreciate it. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey.
Glad you have it back. Yeah, Brett. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth. Hope it helps.
Thank you.
And when I send the stuff to you, I'll send it with all the emails to it. So please reach out to each other. We'll treat this like a thought group. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, all.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Did you take off, son?